Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about the film The Mad Monster, which is an American film produced in 1942. A crazy scientist, he made some experiences which involved making blood transfusions from a werewolf, actually from a wolf, to human beings, and then they would have animal traits and they would kill other people without mercy. And he presented this theory to other people from the academic area. And of course, he was ridiculed. His experience was rejected as impossible, as a manipulation of human nature, as something absurd, and he lost his positions in the university. However, this crazy scientist continued with the experiences in his home laboratory. And then he used as guinea pigs a wolf who was caged in his laboratory and an employee of his house who was a man without too much formal education. So he didn't know too much what was going on, but he had lots of physical strength. So he decided to inject the blood of the wolf in his servant. And every night he got aggressive. The servant, he received the blood injections and he got aggressive. One day he left home and went to a kind of swamp around the house. And then he ended up killing the little daughter of a family who lived nearby. After this incident, the scientist was aware that his experience really worked, and then he decided to use his employee as a human killing machine to take revenge on the other scientists who said bad things about his experience. And this is what happened. One by one, the scientists were murdered because the scientist, he left the other scientists alone with his servant. Then his servant became the kind of beast and he had an instinct to kill and ended up killing the other scientists. We need to see that in this film. Of course that all sorts of groups are insulted. It's extremely offensive to many people. And there's something that I mentioned, some sort of dialogue that is kind of related to World War II. He said that the country was in war. Remember that the United States joined World War II after the Pearl Harbor attacks in the end of 1941. This film was made in 1942, so the USA was already in World War II. And he said that the people who received this blood transfusion and became beasts, killing beasts, they could be used in the war effort. And of course that everyone who heard this was horrified. How come you manipulate nature like that? It's against the laws of evolution. You can't do it. And we can see this as a mention to the killings and to the insane murders that took place in World War II. So let's return to the film. The scientist, he had a daughter, and she had a boyfriend who was a journalist. And it was clear that the father didn't approve of the romance. Someday, this journalist got to find his girlfriend because the scientist, he left his previous city and he didn't allow her daughter to say goodbye to her boyfriend. And of course that when the journalist arrived, the scientist wasn't pleased at all. However, a little girl had already been murdered, some scientists had already been murdered, and by this time the police was totally involved in the case. Nobody knew who or what had killed all those people. It was reportedly a mix of human, a mix of animal, a kind of beast. Judging by the bodies, it looked like the work of an animal, and the police was investigating this. And of course that people started being suspicious about the scientist, who was aggressive all the time. Not all the time, but sometimes, at some moments, but it was frequent. It has all the cliches of low-budget horror films of the time. The megalomaniac scientist, the scientist who was mocked by his peers and sought revenge, the scientist who made unethical experiences, who had no consideration whatsoever for other people, who only thought about himself, who was cold, who was ruthless, and the scientist had all those personality traits. However, as time passed, his servant, he was a human being during the day, no difference at all. At night, he injected the wolf blood into his servant, and then the servant, when he was in this kind of animal state, he was more and more unpredictable. It means that the scientist was having more and more difficulty to control his own servant, his own invention, when he was in a wolf state. Someday, the journalist was more and more distrustful of the father of his girlfriend. He was in his house, and then the servant, he got extremely aggressive in the laboratory, and there was a fire in the laboratory that spread through the house. He got to leave the house with his girlfriend. However, the servant, he was trying to strangle or to kill the scientist somehow. And both the scientist and the servant, they couldn't escape the fire. And then it's interesting because the scientist ended up being killed by his own invention. The plot is far from being revolutionary. It's full of cliches, as I have already said. The low budget is visible throughout the film. When the servant becomes an animal at night, the masks were very poorly made, even for the era. A big studio wouldn't make those poorly made masks. And the props, there aren't many props, there aren't many sceneries. And of course those plots aged well because they weren't considerate with other people, they were very insulting. However, it's nice to see how it worked, horror films at the time. The elements, the laboratory, the behavior of scientists, and the behavior of the victims. There was a formula to make those films. And those films were very frequently produced, especially by the so-called Poverty Row studios, which were studios that only made low-budget films, often with actors and actresses who weren't very known. And it's a really interesting part of the history of cinema that is often neglected. Of course, that we need to see with modern day eyes. We need to be aware of the insults to everyone and put a pinch of salt on that. But it's nice to know, and it's nice to see how the horror genre evolved throughout the decades. That's all for now, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you!